Hello, this is Abel Gonzalez, and I am doing my Week 7 presentation, which will cover the goals and implications of my education. You'll find that it closely follows the journal for week number 7 as well. What is the biblical worldview lens that I'll be using this week? I find it in 2 Timothy 2:15. It states in the following manner, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." And the reason I like this particular version versus maybe the ESV or other similar versions, more contemporary versions, if you will, is its emphasis on the word study. For me, pursuing this degree is about putting the time and effort and labor into, if you will, making myself better than what I was, so that I can do my job and be a better teacher and provide structure and support to the people I encounter. And so this verse and its emphasis on the word study, going back, and I know this is not a theological class, but going back to the original intent, to the best of my knowledge, when Paul uses the word study, he's really referring to kind of this progression. First of all, obviously, to be diligent, but moving forward and to do so by making an effort. And so there's a lot of emphasis on this pressing forward and the struggles that come from putting time into something. And so when he says study to show thyself approved, really it's the effort and the outcome as a coupled result of your work. And so what I'd like to focus on over the course of this time is this theme of improvement of self for the benefit of others. And you know, whether it's this class or the other educational classes, one of the overarching emphasis is this concept in loco parentis, in which we stand in the place as instructors, stand in the place of the parents. Well, we do so with an expectation that we're going to help their students, help their children become better. Well, you can only give to someone that which you have. And so as I improve, hopefully I can benefit these other people with my improvements. Where did this all begin? Well, this all began with a wonderful woman named Suzanne Potter. She was my supervisor at that particular time. I had been teaching for about 5 years, and we were going through a post-observation discussion, going over some of the strategies I use and some of the different things that are entailed in an observation. And she had noted, you don't have an education. You have your credential. I had gone to UCR to get my credential, but you don't have a formal education. There's no backing to what you do. And I said, well, I love teaching. I love being in the classroom. I really don't want to be admin, because that's what my thinking was, that she wanted to move me up somehow. And I said, I'd really like to be in the trenches, in the field, with the students. And she quickly looked at me and said, and what about them? Don't they deserve more from you? And it wasn't angry, I should say. It wasn't frustration. If anything, what I sensed was that you're going to hit a ceiling. Your lack of formal education is going to hit a ceiling. And because of that, you're going to stymie or stunt these students' progress. And with that, I got a kick in the behind, and I really kind of sat down and reflected on what that meant. And very quickly, I decided that I had to move forward. Now, if I'm being honest for a moment, the idea of going back to school was a bit overwhelming, and so I started the program at CBU, the OPS program, not completely knowing what I was going to do. As a matter of fact, when I called for enrollment, they asked me what program I wanted to be in, BA Liberal Arts, and then they asked me one of the most difficult questions I've encountered. Well, what's your emphasis? And I went blank. I had no clue what this gentleman was talking about. What do you mean, an emphasis? And they offered me 4, and because of my being ill-prepared to move forward, I said, well, what would you suggest? And I remember the young man laughed and said, well, it's not up to us, it's up to you. And so first thing that came to my mind was English. I need to be better in my academic writing, and my students need to be better. If I'm going to help them grow, well, I better grow. So quite by accident, and I stumbled into CBU, into the OPS program in 2011, and now some years later, I'm happily able to report, I should say, that I got my BA in liberal arts, emphasis in English, knowing what that is now. In December 2014, I immediately turned around in January and started an MA program in English. I wanted to improve upon some of my literary criticism and analytical skills, and be better at literary theory, so that I could introduce some of these concepts when we did research and some of the different activities we did in my classroom. And so in December 2016, got my MA in English. I was able to write my thesis, my thesis in about a semester, presented it, and I believe it's in the library now. And in May, I started my MA in education. So there has been this forward progress, but not just a forward progress. If you note, an MA in English and an MA in education, I was trying to also be very, very wide-spanning in what I might consider to be some level of expertise. And I did that is so that I could meet one of the first goals that came into clarity over time, and that was to be a more well-rounded instructor. I am a career technical education, a CTE instructor in marketing, and so often it gets a bit of a bad publicity, if you will, as just being an elective. And so part of what we attempted to do was to, as a whole department, is to provide more rigor and bring in other core curriculum instructional practices and introductions into the class. And so in this first goal, I was looking to be more rigorous. I was looking to be multidisciplinary. I was looking to be relevant. And so some of the things that I introduced was reading a lot of literary works to try to extrapolate some of those ideals as it relates to some of the concepts being introduced in marketing. We talked about econ, but we talked about econ in the context of what was going on in The Great Gatsby. We talked about different types of economic systems in Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. That's a traditional economy. Why did that occur? And really try to critically link those ideas to what we were teaching in marketing and how that affects the bigger picture. And so that forced me to collaborate. Oftentimes as teachers, we can be a king unto ourselves and create a fiefdom out of our classroom. And so I needed to collaborate, not just with my professional learning committee there in marketing, but to stretch out and to talk to other people and to discuss what we could do. And so some of the things were based on the Chinese teacher lesson study. And so what I found was some level of success, A, in dealing with my colleagues on campus, colleagues outside of campus and such, but B, as well as moving our classes forward. Now, the CTE classes that I taught were not A through G approved. I teach retail marketing, I teach sports marketing, and so one of the goals we had was to get some of that approved. And so a colleague and I, another sports marketing teacher who is taking his doctorate classes at La Sierra, started to work together. And what was a new process for us, we started writing this year, early 2017, and in the course of months, we submitted our first attempt and we got approval on our first attempt. So we're very proud of what we're finding to be the manifestations of some of the things that we're learning in our degrees and with our colleagues, and it's manifesting in what will be a benefit for our students by having an A through G course approved. One of the other goals that I'd like to have as it relates to my degree is an ability to mentor other teachers. And that comes in both the short-term and the long-term kind of manifestation goal, if you will. And so short-term, let me help the colleagues that I have now. The last 2 years, my supervisors have asked me to help out with some of the new teachers, help them with some of the things that they do. And I've always hesitated because I didn't feel I was ready. I didn't feel I had the expertise. I felt like I was still learning, and I felt that if I don't have a degree, I don't have the expertise to provide for them. But over the course of time, I realized that we're always going to be learning. There's nothing that a person can do to achieve complete mastery, and so I felt a level of indebtedness to give to other people as were given to me. And so instead of saying no, I finally relented to some degree, and part of the RCOE New Teacher Mentorship Program for our CTE instructors. And so there with my employer, RCOE, I was able to take on a couple of teachers and start to provide them with some of the tools necessary. I have 4 teachers now. It's the start of a new year, so it's very early in the program, but lesson plans and classroom management and even some of the data entry things like attendance and grading are things that I can help another person with, because I remember what it was like stepping into a classroom day one and feeling overwhelmed by the many things I had to do. Furthermore, and going into the future somewhat, I'd like to adjunct at the university. I don't have any plans to abandon my classroom. I like teaching marketing. Oftentimes, I get a lot of the at-risk credit retention type of students, and so we're trying to help people who oftentimes have felt burned by the system, and so I like being that, in some levels, last line of defense for a student who is questioning whether they want to continue their education, move on, and so I like being in the classroom. However, I would like to help other teachers, other students who are at similar crossroads that I was at, pursuing a degree at night, having a family, having responsibilities outside of both school and the university and things of that nature. And I want to be there for someone else because someone was there for me. Someone helped me. I remember going to ops classes after work, having to read, having to do different assignments, while still needing to attend to my responsibilities at work and my wife and my children. And so I want to invest in other people just as was invested in me. I believe that's necessary, at least for me, is that the research tells us ultimately that a student success is based on teacher success. Great vision is going to be executed by teachers. Great curriculum is going to be executed by teachers. Great anything, when we look at Stewart's work and we look at the elements that makes a successful program, well, all those things fall to some degree on the shoulders of a teacher, because there's no greater or more proximal tool to student success than a teacher. If the teachers have what they need to be successful, the instruction, the support, the backing, they're going to be able to go in there and set a wildfire loose on these students that will really change the way they look at themselves and their future. And so for me, it's very important to be at the ground level and helping people that A, are the students who don't know what the future holds, and B, are the instructors who are at the ground level with the students and are struggling to figure out what's next, or what can I do better, or how can I improve my practices. Weingarten tells us this, and forgive me if I'm saying his name wrong, tells us this, and notes that providing more support and appropriate training for teachers lends itself to achievement commensurate with the international programs of prominence. And so if we are to move forward with achieving on the international stage, we got to start with the teachers. Stewart says similar by arguing that the, quote, overall quality of a school system rests on the quality of its teachers. We will not be unless our teachers are. And so there's something to be said about that. So I return to my verse, 2 Timothy 2:15. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. I believe, the laboring at our craft pleases God because of how we will better others. While some professions, and I don't mean to demean anyone, but while some professions are about improving self for self, teaching is about improving self for others. And when we give, like Paul gave to Timothy, the church benefited because of those instructions that are in those pastoral epistles. So too, when we are receiving more and studying to be more, we in turn can be more for students. And the goals that I have ultimately are to be of a service to someone else, so that what we learn continues to march down not into the future, but into the hearts of individuals. That will be the future.